So this project is one part of the Pecos National Historical Park project, and we were specifically working with the site of the Forked Lightning Ranch that was located within the park. I worked with two other students to develop a visitor experience plan, and between the three of us, one part focused on the circulation plan, which included vehicular and pedestrian trails and parking. Another part focused on the ranch house that was on site and the interior exhibits. And my part kind of combines some of these elements from both to develop a programming and interpretive plan throughout the landscape. So Pecos National Historical Park is located near Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it is composed of a few different parcels of land that are along the Santa Fe Trail. And again, this project focuses specifically on the Forked Lightning Ranch House, which is located along the Pecos River near the center of the park. So the site has an incredibly extensive history, and to help tell the story of our site, our stakeholders at the national parks identified a period of significance, which was from 1925 to 1970 and correlated with the primary years of site functions here. So starting in 1925, a traveling rodeo promoter named Tex Austin purchased land near the trading post on the site and hired an architect named John Gaw Meem to design a ranch house, which is what later became the Forked Lightning Ranch. So initially, Tex Austin operated the Forked Lightning Ranch as an upscale dude ranch and resort for some time until he sold the land in 1933. And then in 1941, the land was purchased by a wealthy oil man named Buddy Fogelson, who began cattle ranch operations. And then Buddy married an actress named Greer Garson a few years later, and they continued cattle ranch operations and also hosted some pretty huge parties with their rich and famous friends, and a few notable names included David Selznick, Winthrop Rockefeller, and Georgia O'Keeffe. And then around 1970 is when ranch operations started to decline, and the ranch house and its land were sold shortly thereafter, and eventually became part of public lands and the national parks. So that's just a very brief overview of the history and some of its most notable people, and that helped guide some interpretive elements and exhibits throughout the course of this project. So our team got the opportunity to visit the site in January, and we got to work with the Chief of Interpretation to set up some tours around the park and some other places in downtown Santa Fe. So this slide includes some images of notable areas in the site, including various structures around the site, views from different points in the area, and also some places that we just saw opportunities for interventions. So quick shout out to our primary contact, Nick Myers, who helped us out with the project throughout the semester. Nick is the Chief of Interpretation and put together our site visit and provided a lot of other resources. He also put us in contact with some other important staff on the site, including the superintendent, Brenda Todd, the museum curator, Rhonda Brewer, and the facility manager, Jim Huck. And we were able to meet with all of them on site to discuss primary initiatives, as well as opportunities, constraints, and some resources that were available to us. So our primary initiatives that we identified were protecting the natural features of the site, reflecting on the diverse cultural history and highlighting significant figures and operations, and then also enhancing the overall visitor experience by enhancing the current guided tours and also providing some opportunities for self-guided tours as well. So key constraints that we identified was the circulation on the site, which is currently limited by a really narrow one-way road with a bridge that goes over the creek. And currently the only way for visitors to access the site is caravanning with park staff to get to the ranch house. And then once they get there, vehicles have to park at the back of the house, which is not the most exciting view. So that creates an opportunity to develop a better entry experience. And our solution to that was developing a parking lot a little bit further from the site and connecting it to the house via a pedestrian trail that follows an existing emergency access and large vehicle access road. And that would also eliminate the need for caravanning across the little bridge, and would also allow for more self-guided entry into the house. So in addition to the historical elements of the site, I also thought it was important to identify some of the ecological features and typologies on the site, since there is a pretty vast difference in some of the vegetation and topography throughout the site. Some of the key areas are in like a grassland, short grass prairie, which was historically the location of grazing pastures. And then we also saw some juniper woodlands and riparian forests at the lower elevations, closer to the Pecos River and the Glorieta Creek. So this is our overall proposed plan that incorporates the proposed circulation plan. And the interpretive elements um, shown on here include some signage and just some different ways to show the history of the site. And the idea behind each of these points is to create a sort of interactive timeline. So the earliest history of the site would be demonstrated at the pasture as you're driving into the site. And then it would slowly progress through the period of significance as you approach the house. And the section at the bottom here shows the overall trail profile, starting at that parking lot that we proposed, then winding through the path and ending at the ranch house. So our first point on our site is this pasture as you're approaching the site. And unfortunately, live cattle is not in our budget. So I had this vision of adding bronze sculptures of horses and cattle here. So it creates a feeling of cattle in the pasture as you're driving through it. When we were in Santa Fe, we saw a lot of bronze sculptures, and after some research, learned that they were typically used to represent people, culture, and landmarks. So incorporating these into the landscape would reflect the rich cultural and artistic history of Santa Fe. So the horses specifically would reflect the really early history of Santa Fe, going all the way back to the Spanish colonization and expansion. And then the cattle here would represent more recent history with the Tex Austin dude ranching and also the cattle ranching. So the second point here is the barn, which would be the location of visitor parking. Currently, there's nothing in the barn, so it's not that exciting to look at. But the vision here is to relocate a chuck wagon from storage in another area of the park to this barn. And then historically, chuck wagons were used for transporting goods and people and were important to the trade and expansion of Santa Fe, especially along the Santa Fe Trail. And the wagons were also used by Tex Austin for transportation of people and also goods and some like camping things while he was operating his dude ranch. So the image at the bottom here was from Tex Austin dude ranch era. And I think it would be really neat to incorporate that into some signage here. And then as you're walking along the trail, you get to the lowest point of the site, which has the coolest view across to the ranch house. But it's also at the lowest point of the trail and often has water running over it, which is not the most wonderful experience if you aren't prepared to get your feet wet. So we identified a need for some intervention here, but we also have to maintain vehicle access here just in case of an emergency or if larger maintenance vehicles need to access the ranch house. So the idea here is to construct a little overlook point so you can get a good view of the ranch house and avoid stomping through water as you move through the site, while still keeping that road open for vehicles. And there's also an opportunity for signage here to introduce the architect, John Gaumeme, who was hired by Tex Austin to design the ranch house. And his work here was an early expression of his Pueblo revival style, which later defined the architectural style of Santa Fe and started to spread across the entire Southwest region. So from this point, the trail is mostly uphill and you come across this little structure shown in the image here, which we learned is called a pump house. And it was historically used to provide water to the main house for cooking, cleaning, drinking, really any of their water needs. And they often matched the architectural style of the house. So this one is not currently in use, but it would be a great spot for some seating along the trail because it's in the shade, and also some signage about what the structure was used for would be an interpretive element here. And then the current approach to the house spits you out at the back corner of the house, which you can see in the top image on the right here is not the most scenic. So we identified that as an opportunity for improvement and decided to redirect the path around to the front corner of the house. So as you approach the front of the house instead and get a much more interesting arrival experience. And that new arrival point is seen at the bottom image here. And there's not currently much planting around the house, so we were able to find some historic images of planting that included some junipers, some annual flowers, vines. We also believe that the most recent owner, Greer Garson, had some roses here at some point. And after discussing with our park staff, We determined that any vegetation needs to be minimal just because of budget and maintenance constraints. And native plantings were also really important to the park staff. So we decided to keep it simple, stick with some native junipers at the facade of the house and in the front circle drive as you drive up. And there are currently two flagpoles in that front circle. So after discussing with Nick, we decided to remove those because they were added after the period of significance. So it was just not in that period that we were looking at. And then from here, Madeline developed a really awesome package of the interior of the house that includes some exhibits, furniture, and a little courtyard area. And it takes you through each of these time periods again in the interior of the house, just in more depth. And I would argue it's one of the most interesting places in the whole park. So huge shout out again to the whole project team and the National Park staff that worked with us to make this possible.